We're live.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. I'd like to welcome everybody to the chamber and online viewing today to the council meeting of Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. And before we read the land acknowledgement, I'd just like to let everybody know that when you come to the mic during open public open forum, to adjust the mic before speaking into it. And also the councillors, when you are speaking, speak directly into the end of the mic, as this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for those who aren't able to make the meeting in person. The Township of Oro-Medonte acknowledges that we are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people and ancestral territory of the Huron-Wendat. The Anishinaabe include the Odawa, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. It continues today as the home for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the historic Métis community in Penetangwishing. The Anishinaabe people continue to have an enduring relationship with this land, specifically the Chippewa of Rama First Nations, the Chippewa Tri-Council, and the Williams Treaties First Nations. The Huron-Wendat nations also continues to pay respect and protect their ancestors and heritage on this land. We honor the Indigenous history and culture that has thrived for millennia in this territory and the treaties that bind us together as partners in the spirit of a shared, sustainable, and prosperous future. We are all treaty people. Our commitment begins with acknowledging the truth so that we can move forward together towards reconciliation. Miigwech, and thank you. Madam Clerk, may we have a draft motion to adopt the agenda, please?
Moved by Hutchison, seconded by Lavoie. Be it resolved that the agenda for the council meeting of Wednesday, March 12th, 2025 be received and adopted.
All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Is there any member that has a pecuniary interest to disclose at this time? Councillor Schell?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Greenwell. Through you to the public, item 11A is to dealing with short-term rental accommodations, a contract with Granicus. I'm going to declare because I own and operate a bed and breakfast or a short-term rental.
Okay. And Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As an owner of a construction business, I think it would be prudent for me to declare an interest on item 12A, a conflict of interest, as I do construct buildings and submit applications for permits.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Anybody else at this time? Seeing none. Closed session, we have no items on closed session this week, so may we have the draft motion for the two sets of minutes, Madam Clerk?
Moved by Clark, seconded by Bard. Be it resolved that the draft minutes of the Traffic Safety Advisory Committee meeting held on Thursday, February 20th, 2025 be received, and that the draft minutes of the council meeting held on Wednesday, February 26th, 2025 be received and adopted as printed and circulated.
Thank you very much. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Now we're on to item 6, recognitions of achievements. And we have 2 recognitions today. The completion of certificate for municipal office maintenance program. So I'd like to congratulate. I know these certificates take a lot of work and dedication, and I appreciate all the hard work Ms. Aubuchon and Ms. Teeter have done on this. And I know you're the behind support scene that takes care of the township. Madam Clerk, would you like to give a little brief overview of what the certificates entailed and what the work that was done?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very proud to give you some background information on our accreditation. So there's a prerequisite. You must work for a municipality through the Association of Clerks of Ontario Association. You have to have your administration program, which is the MAP program. It takes 2 to 4 years. And then aside from that, to be able to qualify for your CMO accreditation, there are You have to have demonstrated applied knowledge and skills in 8 areas of competency relating to municipal experience and practical examples. These competencies consist of municipal operation, communication, service delivery, government relations and citizen engagement, strategic and organizational management, human resources management, financial management, and leadership. And then anyone holding the designation is required to do a maintenance program every 3 years. So you have a professional submission that you must do to provide proof of competencies in those areas as well. So,
Great. Thank you very much.
and that's what we've completed. We've just completed our 3-year of many rotations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, and I do, once again, I do want to applaud you as council. All does appreciates all the hard work that you and Jeanette put into the words came up multiple times, management, and your leadership has been greatly appreciated. Thank you. And at this,
On behalf of the deputy clerk and myself, thank you so much.
no, thank you. And then I, at this time, like to pass the mic over to Ms. Hewitt to make an announcement as well, please, if you could, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council. It is my pleasure to introduce Kelly Watson, who has joined us as our new Director of People and Culture. Kelly brings over 25 years of progressive HR experience to the municipality, a number of years in the private sector, and very much an individual who prides herself in continuous learning. She has degrees and diplomas from Brock University, Georgian College, Seneca College, and as well labor relations through Queen's University. So we are very fortunate to have Kelly with us, and I know that each of you will give her an Oro-Medonte welcome, and she's there to assist staff and council as we progress through our HR roles. So welcome, Kelly.
And I know I don't like to put people on the spot, but would you like, first of all, I want to say welcome on behalf of council. You are a critical piece to the puzzle of what I consider to be likely one of the strongest teams in municipal politics in the province, because we set quite a high standard bar for ourselves. But you are a great addition, and if you would like to make any comments at this time, please feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome, or hello, everyone. I look forward to meeting everyone and learning a bit more about the township and what we offer, and serving our community as well. So thank you.
Thank you. So, Madam Clerk, may we have the draft motion for the, no, that's, we've, public meetings. So there are no public meetings, there's no deputations. Is there anything that needs to be moved up in the agenda from anyone in chamber that needs to be dealt with that's not staying for the duration of the meeting?
Mr. Mayor, we do have a motion for the achievements portion.
Okay. So you, which one, what item do you want to move?
6A.
6A? Oh, the motion. My apologies. We're on such a roll.
I know.
You know, my apologies.
And I had to go and spoil it all.
Yes, and it's okay, but you know, it's okay. Well, you're qualified. That's right. So please, the motion first, Madam Clerk.
Moved by Young, seconded by Shell, be it resolved that the correspondence from the Association of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers of Ontario, AMCTO, re-completion of Certified Municipal Officer Maintenance Program by Yvonne Aubuchon, Clerk, and Jeanette Teeter, Supervisor, Clerks Services Deputy Clerk, be received. That Yvonne Aubuchon, Clerk, and Jeanette Teeter, Supervisor, Clerks Services Deputy Clerk, be recognized under the Mayor's signature.
Thank you. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? There are none. That is carried. Item 7 is public meetings. There's none scheduled for today, and deputations and presentations, there are none. Is there any items that need to be moved up in the agenda? I see no one has any items to be moved, so we'll move forward to open forum. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone registered to speak in open forum?
I don't believe so, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, is there anyone in chamber who wishes to speak to any of the items on the agenda today? Seeing none, we'll move on to 11, reports of municipal officers, where Mr. Van de Boncourt is going to speak to the reports of municipal officers for action. Item 11A is Mr. Okay, sorry, my apologies. We'll hold one sec. Thank you, Councillor Schell. Councillor Schell has recused him from this matter. So, Mr. Van de Boncourt, if you'd like to continue when ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. Good afternoon, members of council. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Yeah, so at the last council meeting, members of council referred this back to staff to explore a month-to-month contract. Staff met with Granicus in early March, and Granicus has agreed to a month-to-month contract with a 60-day termination clause. So the contract has been amended to include that 60-day termination clause, and the month-to-month ends when the township provides notice. So whenever the township provides notice, that's when the billing would stop. So it's going to be a little under $1,100 per month. And then if council decides to proceed, then we'll carry on. If council decides not to proceed, then it's provided, and the township would only be responsible for the time expended. Your Worship, that concludes my comments, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van de Boncourt. So I'll open the floor now for discussion. Is there any questions regarding this matter? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk for the motion, please.
Moved by Lavoie, seconded by Clark. Be it resolved that DS 2025-036, George Vadeboncourt, Manager, Planning Special Projects, amended contract with Granicus for short-term rental accommodation and bed and breakfast establishments licensing bylaw enforcement be received and adopted. That council authorized staff to enter into an amended one-year contract with Granicus for third-party enforcement services at a cost of $13,012.38 plus HST.
Okay, thank you. Everyone's heard the motion. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that is passed. Mr. Van de Boncourt, thank you very much for your presentation and the follow-up on that matter in a very efficient timeline. So if we want to bring Councillor Schell back in, we will wait till he's seated, and then we will move to item 11B. Okay, so now with 11B, may we have a draft motion for 11B, Madam Clerk?
Moved by Bard, seconded by Young. Be it resolved that OCS 2025-01, Jody Grubb, Supervisor, Community Recreation and Special Events, Recreation Fee Assistance Policy Adoption be received and adopted. That policy POL PR 014 be adopted as presented. That the Director of Operations and Community Services be authorized to execute the appropriate agreements on behalf of the township with the We Are the Villagers organization.
Thank you very much. Council, I'll open the floor now for any comments or discussions on this matter. Seeing none, then I'll, oh, sorry. Okay, no, my apologies. Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Jody, or Miss Grubb, I just wanted to thank you so much. I think sport used to be the great equalizer, and I think for a lot of kids now, they're at a substantial disadvantage from being able to participate as we continue to move more and more towards specialization in youth sports, and it's unfortunate. So I think this is a great step forward for the township to be able to help everyone in our community take part in sport. So I just wanted to thank you, Ms. Grubb, for all of this.
No, thank you, and that's a great comment. I also want to recognize Councillor Bard, who initiated this back close to a year ago, I believe, or in this almost a year from now. But thank you very much for that, and thank you, Ms. Grubb. There's a Councillor Young.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Ms. Grubb, what's the budget for this? I think it's a great program, and I realize I believe this is the first year it's been in place. What's the expected number of kids? Do we have any round number or for the program? Any estimated number?
So right now we don't actually have a specific number that would be registered in into this program, but We Are the Villagers would be the third party offering the program. They already have an abundance of participants within their programs getting funding for different reasons. So it would just be anybody that met the criteria, which would be resident, low income measure being under that. So there isn't a specific number at this time, but we can keep updating that number with We Are the Villagers and keep those reports.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Grubb. Like I said, it's a great program to have in place.
No, thank you very much, and I think all of council agrees. It's a great initiative, and we'll build on it as we move forward. So, may we call the vote? All in favor? Opposed? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much, Ms. Grubb. Reports. We'll now move on to item 12, reports of municipal officers for information only. I understand that Sean, Michael, Stephen, and Connor Jakobchik from Watson's and Associates is available via Zoom to provide a presentation. So if you just want to, Brent, Mr. Spagnell, what I'll let you do is do the introduction, if you don't mind, in the pre-lib. And once, just Councillor Clark just wants to step away from the table, and then we will continue. Thank you, Councillor Clark. Please, at your convenience.
Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. The matter of the item before council this afternoon is really to provide council with information and update regarding the fees and charges review update for the building and planning divisions. Council will recall that there was a budgetary item for this study approved through the budget discussions for the 2024 fiscal year. In 2024, as a result of approval from council to move forward with the budget, staff and Watson have been working together along with township divisions and township departments to provide for a modernized cost recovery model through this report, with the idea to adjust fees related to building division, building permit fees, and planning fees to try to recover costs associated with providing those services. At this point in time, there has been a study that's been completed with an outline of what the current situation is from a cost recovery standpoint. The report also goes over some specific recommendations as to fees that would need to be adjusted to reflect an updated cost recovery so as to recover costs associated for services, which takes into account staff time to provide the services, takes into account indirect costs related to operating costs for the municipality. At the end of the day, the purpose of which is to provide for fees that move the municipality closer to a full cost recovery model to reduce the impact to the taxpayer for those services provided. Staff has arranged for Sean Michael Stephen from Watson and Associate to provide a presentation regarding the findings of the report and are available to answer any questions that council may have with respect to this process. The next steps after this meeting today will be the circulation of notification for a public meeting to present a draft bylaw associated specifically with building division fees, at which point staff and Watson and Associate will collect the comments, make possible revisions to a bylaw, and bring it forward for adoption sometime in possibly May or June to implement those fees. So with your indulgence, I will turn the floor over to Sean Michael Stephen from Watson Associates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spagnell. So Sean, Michael, and Connor, if you would like to proceed once you're ready, and welcome to our chamber today.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Okay, is the presentation sharing on your end?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I won't spend too much time in the introduction with the thorough intro that Ms. Bagnall provided, but just to highlight the key overall objectives of the fee review was to assess what the full cost of service is within the township, and then to make ultimately fee structure recommendations to improve that level of cost recovery, keeping in mind some of the key objectives in terms of making sure we are conforming with legislation and being defensible, and then balancing the needs of improving cost recovery with stakeholder interest and the affordability and competitiveness of the fees as well. So in that regard, so the main items that I'll cover this afternoon is just to give you a brief outline of what the legislative authority is to impose the fees. There's various pieces of legislation these fees fall under, the methodology that we utilize for the fees review and to assess the full cost of service, and then what those results were, and ultimately a high-level overview of the impact of the fee recommendations, recognizing that the detailed recommendations by individual fee have been provided within the report. So firstly, with respect to planning application fees, the authority to impose these fees comes under Section 69 of the Planning Act. What that section allows municipalities to do is to impose fees for the anticipated cost of processing each type of application. And that's fairly important in terms of the way that is worded, is that we're able to look at the anticipated cost and not the actual cost of any given application, but the anticipated cost of each type of application in general. But then we're also limited just to the processing costs. And so there are costs related to the planning functions of a municipality, such as broader planning policy development, that aren't part of processing applications, aren't part of the cost that would be recovered through these development application fees. And then as well, the test refers to each type of application. And so municipalities are limited in terms of their ability to cross-subsidize their costs between different types of applications from a fee recovery standpoint. So you can't set fees below full cost recovery levels for an application like minor variances and make up that shortfall through setting higher than full cost fees for other applications like subdivisions, for example. And then these fees can always be protested and appealed to the OLT. Moving on to the building permit fees. So these are imposed under the Building Code Act. The test is a little bit more broad here, where you're able to impose fees for the issuance of building permits, and that those fees must not exceed the reasonable cost of administering and enforcing the Building Code Act. So a more broad here in terms of the test being at that overall building code level. So you do have the ability to cross-subsidize your levels of cost recovery between the different types of building permit reviews and building code activities that you're undertaking. And as well, it speaks to anticipated costs, and it also allows municipalities to create reserve funds for these purposes. And so that, as we'll talk about later, that really informs the approach around having fees set to not just recover your costs, but also contribute towards your reserve funds for future service sustainability, so that those services can be provided in a sustainably funded manner and not have any tax-based funding implications if there are economic downturns that impact permit activity and therefore building permit revenues. As was mentioned, there is a requirement to hold a public process or a public meeting before any change in building permit fees, but there are no public meeting requirements for changes in planning application fees. And then lastly, within the scope of this review, some of the related planning fees or engineering fees are not for the processing of planning applications under the Planning Act, but would be enforced under your general fees and charges provision of the Municipal Act. So to give you an overview of the process that we went through with staff in terms of determining the full cost of service, it's a pretty exhaustive process in which we looked at, starting on the right-hand side of this illustration, first, what were the types of applications, permits, and activities that we wanted to assess what the full costs were. And so those generally would have fit into building permits. So looking at your Group C residential permits, looking at new versus alterations and various other subtypes of permits in detail to look at how the intensity of effort and amount of staff involvement changes by permit type. Similarly with planning applications, looking at the different types of planning applications, whether that's subdivisions or site plans, as well as looking at initial applications versus resubmissions, minor and major distinctions as well, to understand the change in level of effort for different types of applications, and then the other engineering fees as well that are imposed. The next step in the process then was to work with staff to understand what is the process that staff proceeds through for each individual application or permit, from the pre-consultation through to review and inspection processes, and look at who is involved from the various departments across the organization and how much time they would spend on those processes for each application or permit type. And so primarily that's going to be staff in the planning and building services departments, but have some other ancillary involvement from other departments as well, especially when we're thinking about planning applications and the fact that these applications are circulated for comments from other departments as well. And so then what we spent a fair bit of time with staff on was verifying the reasonableness of those effort estimates in terms of how much time staff are spending on the various activities. And doing so with regard for not just the time on a per application or permit basis, but as well as what does this represent in terms of an annual utilization of staff time when we apply these effort estimates to the annual volumes of the different permits and applications. And that's really important because this effort estimation process informs the allocation of direct and indirect costs. And what we want to make sure we're doing is reflecting a level of service that is reasonable, that you can deliver. So ensuring that those effort estimates result in levels of staff utilization that are reflective of how we know senior management knows staff are deployed on an annual basis across these various activities, and recognizing that they're involved in some activities that might not be fee recoverable, like I mentioned earlier with policy review or defensive applications at the OLT. So I want to make sure that we're only including costs that relate to the processing of the planning applications or the administration enforcement of the Building Code Act. And so that annual utilization of staff is the driver then for how we allocate not only their resource costs, so their salary, wage, and benefit costs by individual, but as well as other direct departmental costs like materials and supplies. And then as well on the left-hand side of the illustration, also that's the driver for how we then allocate the indirect support and overhead functions of the organization that are required to allow those departments to function. So areas like human resources and IT and general governance and finance that are needed to allow those areas to function. So firstly, just to give you a high-level overview of that annual staff utilization, within the planning application reviews, there's about just over 8 full-time equivalent staff positions from across the organization utilized on those activities. when we look at what types of applications consume the majority of that effort, we can see just under a third of that is related to committee of adjustment applications, or more appropriately in your case would be your development committee applications for things like minor variance and consent. Site plan applications are another significant area of involvement, representing about 28% of the annual staff efforts here. And then other planning applications would be the next most notable area, about 18%. And that includes, for the most part, things like zoning certificates that staff spend a lot of time on. Then the remainder of the annual effort would be for other application types like official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, as well as subdivision condominium applications, which, while on an annual basis, don't represent as much time as minor variance applications, for example, on a per application basis are much more involved. I'm looking at building permit review. So here we can see that there's about 7.6 full-time equivalents used annually. And when we look at where the majority of that staff time is being spent, we can see about a quarter of that time is on new residential construction permits, about another quarter on the septic permits that staff are also involved in, and about, let's see, what's also notable is about 22% of staff time is spent on other managerial and oversight of the department of the Building Code Act activities. So in aggregate then, across those service areas within planning and building, the annual costs are about $3.2 million. About 71% of those costs are for those direct salary, wage, and benefit costs of staff, representing about $2.2 million. The other direct costs of the departments represent about 8% of those costs. Then we can see the indirect costs are about 21% of the total cost, just under $670,000. And that's fairly consistent with what we see in other municipalities, where those where indirect costs as a percentage of total costs typically range between about 15 and 25%. So then looking at, sorry. Looking then at the how those costs break down for planning versus building, what we can see is that the within planning, the costs are about $1.62 million out of the $3.2 million, and building permit fees a little bit less, but just under 1.6. So fairly even split from a cost standpoint between planning and building activities. But we look at the cost recovery levels based on average historical application volumes and current fees, we can see the current level of cost recovery differs significantly. So planning application fees are recovering about $250,000 annually, or about 15% of those costs. Building permit fees are covering about $1 million, about 64% of those costs. So in aggregate, about a $1.9 million shortfall annually, just under 40% cost recovery levels. And so that $1.9 million would be funded by a combination of other non-user fee supported sources, such as the levy, or in the case of building permits, building permit reserve fund. And just to put that into context, if that entire $1.9 million was funded as a levy impact, that does represent just under 10% of the total levy based on the 2024 operating budget. So with planning, just to look at that in a little bit more detail by application type, I just want to highlight here the different levels of cost recovery by types of planning applications. So official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications, we can see are recovering about 25% of their costs, a little bit better than the average. Subdivision and site and condominium applications recovering very similar to that average level at about 13% cost recovery. But then we can see that site plan applications are significantly under recovering their costs currently, only at about 6% cost recovery resulting in about a $540,000 annual shortfall. Then the Development Services Committee fees as well, also significantly contributing to the annual shortfall. Well, they are at 24% cost recovery, greater than that average, because of the volume and the applications and the annual costs. We do about a $350,000 shortfall in that regard.
No, he's not, I think.
So some of the recommendations that have been made with respect to planning applications are to introduce new minor and major fees for zoning bylaw amendments, special plan amendments, and
Excuse me,
minor
I
variances.
apologize for interrupting. I think your slides on your presentation are not aligned with where you are. I think you're ahead from the slide we have is annual cost for current fees, cost recovery. So we're on slide 12 of the presentation, but I believe you've got ahead. If we can get the slide presentation in line with it, would be great.
I thought it was advancing, but let me just.
No, it's no problem.
Reshare it.
We can probably throw it up from here.
I believe we're on slide 14 now. Is where you are.
Can you see that now?
Yep, I got it now. Thank you very much.
Okay. Sorry,
and I apologize for interrupting. That was
no, much needed. So then in terms of some new fees have been introduced. So resubmission fees have been introduced where applications have been submitted, deemed complete. There have been initial submissions for different application types, whether it's for, depending on the application, whether it's for the second or third resubmission. There would then be resubmission fees applied to try and encourage the submission of complete applications and to work through those any outstanding issues in an efficient manner. A new fee for temporary use bylaws. We also looked at with staff the efficiencies around when official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications are received concurrently, as they often are, and to reflect a discount in comparison to the two standalone application fees. And as well for subdivision applications, introducing a separate fee for the engineering review and inspection coordination efforts that are required at the back end of that subdivision development process. And then lastly, with respect to the fees for subdivision and site plan applications, we've also looked at changing the structure of those fees, where they now include not just a flat fee, but a base application fee plus a variable fee that's charged either per unit in the proposal or per square meter of gross floor area. And that fee structure allowing those fees to move more in line with the level of review required on larger applications.
excuse me.
So with those recommended fees that again are in detail in the report, we can see the improvement in cost recovery level. So for the official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and subdivision condominium applications, those will be moved to full cost recovery levels overall. The site plan and development service committee applications will be moved between 60 and 70% cost recovery levels. And the other planning applications, again, primarily those zoning certificate reviews, would be just under 50% cost recovery levels, with those areas that are below full cost recovery being driven by the affordability of those fees in comparison to other municipalities. And so that improvement to 71% cost recovery overall at average historical application volumes, that would generate almost an additional $900,000 in annual revenue, which again equates to just under 5% of the township's net levy based on the 2024 operating budget. So moving on to building permit fees, the important thing to highlight here is that while the department overall is at 64% cost recovery levels, we do see a much greater discrepancy between the percentage cost recovery for the different types of review, between as much as 150% down to as low as 9% for non-residential alterations, accessory buildings. Seeing this kind of disparity is not unusual for building permit fees. Because of the way the legislation is worded, in that you are, can recover the cost of administering and enforcing the code overall, most municipalities intentionally design their fees to have this type of cross-subsidization with the intent of trying to encourage compliance with the Building Code Act. Because there are a number of more minor building permit activities that, or building permit reviews that municipalities undertake for things like sheds and decks and docks and so forth, that can be somewhat intensive from a staff standpoint. And if you were to charge the full cost of review, it would really inhibit people's desire to come forward through the building permit review process, and would likely significantly increase your enforcement cost. So with respect to the building permit fee recommendations, they've generally been made within the current fee structures, and generally maintaining a similar place within the comparator municipalities. Some of the notable changes are that there would be a surcharge for applications paid by credit card through Cloud Permit, where for less than $5,000 to recover those additional processing fees that you'd have. As well, when we're looking at the fee recommendations, we're not just looking at the individual permit cost in a given year. We're looking at how these costs and revenues would change over the next 5 years based on forecast permit activity, to ensure that we're not just recovering the anticipated costs each year, but they're also providing for those contributions to the Building Code Act Stabilization Reserve Fund, so that you do have that funding source in place for future reserve sustainability. And the important thing to note here is that when we looked at the forecast of building permit activity based on applications that are in the development review process, when we discussed with the staff and what impact that would have on township staff needs, it was determined that the increase in building permit activity could be accommodated within existing staffing levels. So there are some economies of scale that could be seen there over the forecast period. So then with respect to the reserve fund strategy, so the township doesn't currently have a formal policy in that regard. Most municipalities in Ontario generally have policies to look at setting their or targeting the reserve fund balance of between 1 to 2 times the annual cost of service. So with that in mind, that's what would be used as a target to move the township towards that sustainable level. And so with the recommended fees and the forecast costs and revenues that would result, what we'll see is that the township's current reserve fund is just under 48% of annual costs. And with the anticipated building permit activity and fee recommendations, that would increase to about 89% of annual costs by the end of the 5-year period. So not moving immediately to that 1 times annual cost level, but moving towards that in that direction. And the reason I think it's reasonable to move towards that level and not necessarily get there in the 5 years is that we don't want to overburden development in the next 5 years with contributing to a reserve fund for the long-term sustainability of the department, that should be transitioned over a longer period. So this table then shows at the historical permit volumes with the recommendations what level of cost recovery you would be at, and this shows that you'd be at 94% cost recovery, not at that full cost recovery level, but as I mentioned, with the economies of scale that are anticipated with an increase in permit volumes, that you would reach that full cost recovery level. And so that's what's being illustrated in this chart here. And so just to explain, in the bars that are shown in orange and dark blue, that's showing the annual anticipated revenue in orange and the expenses in blue. And so as we can see, each year those revenues are greater than the expenses, meaning that you would have some contributions to the reserve fund. The dotted line in blue is where that reserve fund would want to be if you were targeting 2 times annual cost. The dotted line in yellow is where you'd want to be for your reserve fund if you're targeting 1 times annual cost. And then the green line is how that reserve fund would increase over the 5-year period with those annual contributions that are seen with that difference between the revenues and expenditures. So we can see again, moving from about 50% of annual costs currently up closer to that full cost recovery level, or sorry, up to that 1 times annual cost level by the end of the forecast period. And maybe actually before I move forward, I think one other thing probably to note is probably top of mind to a lot of individuals is, with the current geopolitical environment that we're in and the interest rates and some of the softening of the housing market that we're seeing right now, if that does impact the forecast building permit activity and there is a bit of a slowdown there, then what's being shown here won't materialize in the same fashion. It may result in either a slower accumulation of those reserve funds or even possibly some drawing down of those reserves in the near term until building permit activity picks back up and those contributions can start to be made and reestablish that reserve fund. So it really just affirms the need to have a reserve fund that is in a healthy position so that you can withstand any of these economic impacts and downturns without there being an impact on the levy of having to start to fund some of the building permit review services so that you can maintain that service capacity and withstand some of these storms. Sorry, so then jumping around there a bit, sorry. So just to show you where some of these current and proposed fees compare relative to other Simcoe County municipalities. So we can see with official plan amendment fees for a major official plan amendment, your current fees are the lowest of the comparative municipalities, with the proposed increase, which is fairly significant in comparison to that current fee, that would move you up to about 4th in the comparison between that of Tiny and Penetanguishee. Looking at zoning bylaw amendment fees, it would be a similar magnitude of increase, again, moving up to that ranking 3rd or 4th in the comparators, again within that range towards the upper mid portion of those comparators, moving from that current level of less than $2,000 to just over $7,000 for that application. Looking at a smaller site plan application, about 1,000 square meters. In this case, that would move the township again from the bottom of the comparison up to 2nd, below Midland, but just above that of Barrie. And then here with what we're going to highlight with the subdivision fees are, these are in some cases a little bit hard to compare between the different municipalities depending on how they recover cost for the engineering services and whether they have those costs are entirely funded through third parties and directly paid for by applicants, or whether they have internal costs at the municipal level that they require applicants to pay for. And so this shows the planning portion of the fees in dark blue and the engineering portion in lighter blue. And so we can see you only currently have a planning fee. And so for a 100-unit subdivision, that fee would move from its current level of less than $20,000 up to closer to $140,000 for a 100-unit subdivision application, or about $1,400 per unit. right? We can see the largest impact to that is adding in additional cost for the engineering review associated with those applications. Then to look at building permit fees. So firstly, for a single detached dwelling unit of just over 2,100 square feet, the fees are currently at the highest in the comparators, and with the minor increase being proposed, they would obviously maintain that same current position. Looking at accessory structures or garages for residential, those fees would remain unchanged, and they're currently much more competitively priced in that market. So recognizing the affordability concerns around these types of building permit applications. For the minimum permit fee, there is a proposed $50 increase to that fee, which would put you higher than Penetanguishene and Midland. When we look across the broader geographies in the GTA and surrounding areas, not out of line with minimum permit fees that we see elsewhere. And so lastly, what we wanted to just highlight was when we sort of put all of these planning and building fee recommendations together, what we've spent a fair bit of time with staff and taking staff's opinion on, as well as making sure that the fees that would be imposed for minor planning applications, as well as minor building permit applications and applications are typically applied for by existing residents versus new development, have remained affordable and competitive where possible, but that there's in some cases greater increases on the major planning application and building permit fees that are paid for by new development. And so to help put that into some context, what we wanted to show was, where do these planning and building permit application fees fit within the overall municipal development fees that are payable? And so this chart is showing for a 100-unit subdivision that would go through an official plan, a zoning bylaw amendment, a plan of subdivision, then pay building permit fees and development charges. What do these fees represent as a share of those total development fees payable? And so as you can see here, in all of the municipalities in the dark blue, the development charges represent 90% or greater of the application fee, of the total municipal development fees that are payable. And so with the increases that are proposed for the township, we can see building or the planning application fees can't even really register them visually on this slide because they represent a very small share of the total cost. The building permit fees are in green, which represent a slightly larger share. But with those proposed increases, the relative position doesn't change in comparison to the other municipalities. So when looking at the overall cost of for this type of development, these proposed increases don't make it more or less affordable in the township versus any of the other municipalities. So still above that in Midland, but below that in Springwater, Essex, Clearview, Tay, and significantly below that in Barrie. So just to summarize again, based on the recommendations and the revenue impacts that we presented, with the proposed increase in revenue, it's anticipated there would be a decrease on the municipal tax burden of funding these services of about $900,000 for planning application fees, about $460,000 in additional revenue for building permit fees, not being shown as an offset to tax funding because those services are currently funded through your building permit reserve funds. And then again, just to highlight the increase in overall cost recovery levels from a percentage of cost standpoint, planning application fees moving from 15 to 71% cost recovery in aggregate, building permit fees from 64 to 94% based on historical volumes, but based on when we look at projected volumes and the economies of scale from a cost standpoint, going to full cost recovery levels, including contributions to reserve funds. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to assist in answering those.
Oh, no. Well, thank you very much. You know what? It's it's a fantastic report, and it clearly lays out a gap that needs to be filled, or so and at the end of the day, this is putting the cost recovery on the individuals that are applying for the permits, and not spreading it over the tax levy. So I'll open the floor at this time for any questions. Councillor Young, and then Councillor Hutchison, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Being as we're at the bottom of most of those graphs, I'm going to assume, and it's likely that this review is long overdue. But one of the things that caught my attention was the appeals to the OLT, the protest of the cost. Now, is there any process in there, whether formal or informal, of mediation? I know for that, I know several weeks ago, several councils ago, we had one builder come before, and he protested the cost. I think it was $13,000 thereabouts, and I believe the bottom line was that planning ended up charging full fine for that. But so I'm going to assume there's not a process for mediation, because I guess in some sense it would set a precedent that you'd have numerous other builders coming perhaps before you and protesting the cost. And we're all concerned about legal costs and our aversion to going to the OLT. But what I want to know from you have no doubt done this to the review of building fees with other municipalities. Whether you know it or not, would you have any idea of the number of appeals that we could expect on this? I don't know if you follow that much through the process or not.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I couldn't answer it with any real quantitative certainty, but they're not overly common. So from the many municipalities we've worked with, on occasion we'll be reached out to assist in understanding some of the background around an appeal or a challenge they might have had, but it's fairly uncommon. And where I have seen it, it's typically with fairly unique circumstances that would be seen much more in the GTA around high density site plan development and how those planning and engineering fees have been calculated and imposed. Less so for other types of applications, but there certainly can be always unique circumstances that arise.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Any other questions at this time? Councillor Hutchison.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor Greenlaw, through you, perhaps to Director Spagnol, and I just would like to elaborate a little bit on what Councillor Young had first questioned. It was very interesting to go through this presentation and see the gaps that we have in Oro-Medonte and compared to the comparators within our area, and also how it impacts the general tax levy. So my question would be, when was a review like this last conducted for Oro-Medonte?
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, to Councillor Hutchison, it's my understanding that a review of this depth has not been completed in the Township of Oro-Medonte for the planning and building divisions. My understanding is that there's been comparison and comparable type reviews that have been conducted that takes a look at surrounding municipalities, but one of this depth has not been completed before.
Okay, thank you. Supplemental?
Yes. Thank you, and thank you for that. So I guess my second question would be, and I don't see Shannon in the room, but it just causes me to think with regard to the reserve aspect of planning and the lack of reserves that we have currently in planning, and the this plan to help to increase the reserves for future, would we be in the same situation in other departments within Oro-Medonte that we're aware of right now?
Mayor
Would you like
Greenlaw,
to try that, please?
well, Mayor Greenlaw, through you to Councillor Hutchison, I think I would definitely refer that question over to the Director of Finances, as she would be more in the loop as to provide a correct response.
Supplement, sorry. Yeah, because for me, I'm just looking at this, and I thank you for coming to us last year and looking for us to approve the funding of this particular report, because I think by doing this in-depth analysis of the department that you're in charge of, we've really been able to see a much better picture of what needs to be done going forward for your department, and hopefully we can have that same level of understanding as we move through to improve overall the efficiencies of the organization. So thank you.
Would you like to comment further? Just, I saw your card. I don't want to cut you off.
Mayor Greenlaw, I just wanted to just direct your attention to Mr. McCartney has his hand up, and just refer, just with your indulgence.
No, thank you. Mr. McCarthy, please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to actually Councillor Young's question in regards to any variance on fees or any changes of those with fees specific to the Building Code Act. Once that notice has been given and the 21 days notice, once that's been given and provided, that is given the public the opportunity to make any comments associated to the proposed fees. Once those fees have been approved through council, that same process would have to occur again in order to change any of those fees or to waive any of those fees. So that process would have to occur again to change anything within the building fees schedule.
Thank you very much for that additional clarity, Mr. McCartney. Does that make things transparent, Councillor Young?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mr. Courtney.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Bard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. To echo, thank you so much for doing this. Obviously, this needed to be done to get us up to date for the cost recovery. But some of these fees have increased significantly or proposed to increase significantly. So I was wondering if you could maybe, there wasn't a last fee review, but if you could give an idea of how much the role has changed or what is different within the department, because I'm assuming at one point in time, people had to have all their ducks in a row, come drive here, submit everything, and they didn't want to come back. So maybe if you could shed some light on how things have changed for your department.
Through Mayor Greenlaw to Councillor Barden, and thank you for approaching staff prior to the meeting as well with these questions. It's quite useful and handy to provide for a productive meeting to give the information that's needed. As far as how the duties have changed, there's been multiple reports that have been brought forward to council about provincial changes, legislative changes that have come abroad, which have an impact and a direct impact on process. So to quantify the specifics, I couldn't do that at this point, but there have been legislative changes that have occurred that have required additional services within the municipality. I would say the key change across the board, and this would just be in my experience in a previous life with respect to fees, is that when the fees are not adjusted to reflect the cost of salaries and benefits and the indirect cost tied to the municipality for providing service, there tends to be a larger gap when those fees are not adjusted in a timely manner. So to answer your question, the process, there have been process changes, but what's occurred over time is the cost of doing business has increased because salaries have increased, benefits have increased, overhead costs for buildings, fleet, things of that nature have gone up. So, which is why, taking a look at the costs at this point in time and trying to bring them up closer to cost recovery is important to reflect those changes in providing the level of service. And I would turn it over to Sean Michael if he has anything to add on top of my response as well, as he is available.
Sean Michael, would you like to add anything at this point?
No, I don't think so. I think that covers it fairly well.
Okay, thank you. And a supplemental, Councillor Bard?
Yeah, thank you. And I do like to see in there that there's the resubmission fee, because I'm guessing that would add some things, so that's a good addition. Maybe a simpler question. It talked about minor variance, and then it has major minor variance and minor variance. I was just wondering if you could give an example of each of those, please.
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, to Councillor Bard. Well, sorry for jumping in, Sean Michael. The variance, the difference between the recommended fees is really reflective of the level of work or the amount of work that goes into each application. Council, being part of Development Services Committee, can see those applications coming in, and when you've got one variance application with a variance for height for an accessory building, for a setback, for total square footage, that requires a higher level of effort, more effort from staff to process, because now you're applying those 4 tests on 3 different variances versus 1. So really the distinction is for anything to do where there's multiple variances coming in for accessory buildings, that would be the starting trigger for what would be considered a major minor variance versus a minor application. It really does come down to the level of effort that staff are putting towards those types of applications. And I do know that there was a question that was posed with respect to the township taking a look at the zoning standards related to accessory buildings, for example, to possibly, relinquish the need for the number, the volume of minor variance applications. That is typically something that would be done through your zoning bylaw amendment update, and that would be done by taking a look at the zoning standard to make sure that whatever the size of the buildings are reflective of the community from a built form perspective, and it requires just a more in-depth look. But those types of considerations are typically looked at through the zoning amendment and updating process. But the comment and the question is definitely appreciated, and that is something that is on staff's radar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Did you have any additional questions at this time?
No, thank you. I just wanted to touch that we do see a lot of DSC applications to make garages bigger. So just if they started bigger, that might help a bit. But anyway, I think Director Spagnol covered that. Thanks.
Thank you. And just, I'd like to put one through to Mr. Spagnol, just as a follow-up to John or Councillor Bard briefly touched on. The resubmission fees, I guess what I just want to ensure is what steps are we doing to educate the applicant? I don't know, is there color coding on the application of mandatory sections that need to be filled out in order, because I don't, I don't want to say this negatively towards anybody, but I don't want it to be the public saying, well, yeah, everyone has to pay for a resubmission fee because I wasn't clear. So how do we educate the applicants prior to, is it all covered within potentially the pre-consult?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. So mentioning the pre-consultation application, that's one of the key areas where the identification of the report requirements and whatnot would be spelled out very clearly by township staff. There are instances where applicants decide not to be involved in pre-consultation. However, one of the options that was put forward was that there could potentially be some form of a refund if somebody does pre-consult with the township and refund those pre-consultation fees, because then that's more of an incentive to come to the township, talk to staff, talk about report requirements and things of that nature to make sure that a complete application is submitted. So definitely through pre-consultation. But from a resubmission standpoint, really the triggers are spelt out in that if there's any changes to the applications that require a resubmission of the application where it's changing the initial intent of the application, those would be the types of situations where a reapplication would typically be required. From an engineering review standpoint, the triggers would be on the engineering merits of the applications and how many times staff have had to review the same drawings in the same sets, but there's different triggers and milestones that are going to be set in place to trigger the need for a resubmission and an application fee.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions at this time? So, I think I got one question for Sean, Michael. Like when I look at the graphs of the different municipalities, And I applaud our planning department for taking the initiative to get the ball in motion on this. Does that kind of draw the picture that there's a lot of municipalities that are not implementing a full cost recovery model in this area?
I would think so. Some of these municipalities we know have undertaken full cost recovery reviews. Some haven't, to my knowledge anyway. They could have done any various reviews internally or things I'm not aware of, but there's certainly some that haven't done that. And so the 4 municipalities that haven't done a review at all or in a significant amount of time, the types of increases you're seeing are fairly common.
Okay.
So I think that's just important to note.
No, and thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for the presentation. But I think in closing this off, before the motion, I want to commend our planning department for taking this initiative, because what we're doing is putting the cost in the areas of the applicant or the developer, rather than dispersing this significant gap of cost recovery onto the tax levy. And I think everyone in the township would be acceptable to. Mr. Spagnell.
And thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. I think from staff's perspective, the budgetary allocation to go move forward with the study is something that was needed, and staff appreciates the direction of council and those decisions to move this from a budgetary perspective. And in addition to that, I think it's important to thank the Oro-Medonte team for their involvement in participating in all the meetings and discussions to arrive at a level of effort so that we could land on these recommended fees. It truly was a team effort that required cross-department, cross-divisional participation. So I think kudos needs to go out to the entire team on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. I think fair budgetary responsibility is what it's come down to, and I think that's a huge and significant step in the right direction. Madam Clerk, may we have a motion on this item, please?
Moved by Shell, seconded by Hutchison. Be it resolved that the report as listed under item 12, reports of municipal officers for information only, be received. DS 2025-034, Brent Spagnell, Director, Development Services, fees and charges update, building and planning, and including the presentation by the representatives from Watson and Associate Economists Limited.
Thank you very much. Everyone's heard the motion. I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Sean Michael, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for a great report and a great presentation.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so if we can bring Councillor Bard back in, or not Bard, Clark. This one. Okay. Welcome back, Councillor. We're now on to item 13, reports of announcements of members of council. Is there any updates from any members regarding county or committees? Councillor Shell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Greenlaw, through you to members of council and public. Ottawa-Sauga Valley Conservation Authority wants me to remind everybody that this time of the year the rivers and streams are rising, and they're starting to flood, and the riverbanks are very slippery and muddy. And on a personal note, I can attest to that. A number of years ago, I've had over 30 years canoe tripping experiences of taking people out into the wilderness camping, and I decided to go down the Ottawa-Sauga River to get some fiddleheads in April. Carrying my canoe down to the water, I didn't have my life jacket on, and I stepped on the bank, and down I went. Slid right down, almost into the river. I'm glad I didn't, because it was very, very cold. And for you parents out there that don't realize how cold water is, when your body hits that cold water, your chances of drowning are very, very high, especially on rivers where there's ice still there and the rivers are flowing. You're under that ice and you're not coming back out.
No. Thank you very much for those comments. And you're right, because once you get into cold water, it doesn't take long for the muscles to cramp up and stop working for you. So any other comments at this time? Sorry, Councillor Hutchison.
Sorry, you said comments. And I just, honestly, I want to take this opportunity to thank Dylan Flannery and Carla and your team over the last month or so with the amount of snow that we had and the number of calls and emails that I sent to you and your team to be addressed. And I think you just did a terrific job when it came to dealing with the situation, but your response time to inquiries and letting me know and other members of council know sort of what your progress was so that we could relay that back to our communities as the calls came in. So thank you. I really appreciate, I personally, and I'm sure, I don't want to speak on the rest of council, but I don't think they would disagree that we're really pleased and we're able to help our communities along with your assistance. And secondly, I did want to just welcome Kelly as well. And I wanted to use it as an opportunity just to say, from my observation, the amount of transformational change that we're seeing at the township office is incredible. The team is strong and focused, and I've been very happy to be involved with the HR committee in working towards this change with CAO bins, and I'm just thrilled to see where we're going to go forward. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Any other members at this time? I guess the only thing I will bring up is County Council this week. We did have the public meeting in regards to composition of County Council. Was very interesting. We had 3 people present, and there's a number of letters that came in. It is still not all one way or the other. It's very divided. There's concern over the voice, the diversity of having a 32-member council where if you half it, you may lose some of the different skill sets. And the feedback may not be as vibrant. There's also was a lot of concern of the agricultural from the smaller municipalities losing their voice at county as the weighted vote could be is controlled by 6 municipalities. So that would be what would be kind of deemed the 5 urban more centers, not including Barrie and Orillia because they are tier 1 municipalities. But of the remaining 16, 5 plus one other municipality would carry the majority of the vote in a weighted vote. So, it will go back. It will now, as the process continues, it will go out to all the individual municipalities to be presented at a future meeting, and then that will come back and be part of the process. So. So that just kind of updates you to where we are now. So that being said, if there's no other reports from any of the councillors, we can move on to the consent agenda. Is there any items in the consent agenda that you wish to have pulled? Seeing none, may we have a motion to receive the consent agenda, Madam Clerk?
Moved by Hutchison, seconded by Young. Be it resolved that the staff recommendations with respect to the items listed under consent agenda correspondence be adopted as printed.
All in favor? Opposed? There are none. That is carried. We have no communications or petitions this week. We have no notice of motions. We have no bylaws. I'm not saying we don't have any bylaws, but we have no bylaws on the agenda. No closed session items to cover off. May we have the motion for the confirmation bylaw, Madam Clerk? Oh, my apologies.
No, it's mine. I'm sorry. You're ahead of me. I hadn't flipped my page over.
No.
Notice of motions. I'll be bringing forward a notice of motion regarding council code of conduct.
Okay. Thank you very much. So the notice of motion, Madam Clerk, will come at the next council meeting. And then, okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, for clarity, it will appear on the next agenda.
Yes.
And be on the agenda, but not for discussion on the floor until the following.
So just, to create, so how it would work is the next meeting, the notice of motion, we will allow a very high level overview of the objective of the motion and contain specifically to that. And then the motion would come 2 weeks following that in April at that meeting. Okay, so we're at number 19 now. May we have a motion for the confirmation bylaw, Madam Clerk?
Moved by Lavoie, seconded by Bard. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2025-026, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting held on Wednesday, March 12, 2025, be read a first, second, and third time, passed, be engrossed by the clerk, signed and sealed by the mayor.
All in favor? That is carried. And may we have a motion to adjourn?
Moved by Shell, seconded by Clark. Be it resolved that we do now adjourn at 4:21 p.m.
Okay, all in favor? That is carried. And I will, just to reiterate Councillor Shell's words earlier, I would like everyone to be cautious around any moving, stay off the ice, please, and any moving water, because we are supposed to get some warm temperature this weekend, and the water flow around the rivers and tributaries will be flowing. So, just be cautious, be safe, and watch for your kids in those areas.